Hi there, boys and girls. Welcome once again to Story Hour. My name is Carole Gooden. Today, all our stories are about African Americans. I hope you enjoy them. The first story is called The Wishing Chair, written and illustrated by Dupré and published by Carole Books. It was a sunny July Sunday. The cement of Granny Thelma's steps was hot to the touch, and the smell of her peonies was sweet in the heavy summer air. As usual, Eldon was spending his Sunday playing at Granny Thelma's, while his mom was off at work in the city. Eldon loved to sit on the steps and watch people as they walked by. Almost everyone had a smile or a wave for Thelma's Sunday guest. Granny's yard was perfect for a game of Captain Explorer. Eldon pretended he was in Africa, making his way through a thick jungle. The tiger lilies became tigers, and the round, chunky hedges formed a line of elephants. The tall, polka-dotted fruit trees leaned over him like long-necked giraffes. Of course, some days the jungle was a bit too wet or a bit too cold, and Eldon would have to play inside. This was by no means second best, because the house held plenty of adventures. While Granny worked in the big room, Eldon would play all around, in little rooms with slanting ceilings, and in warm rooms with soft carpet floors. Sometimes Eldon played that the house was a ship, and he would stumble around with the tossing of the waves. Other times he pretended the floor was a swamp filled with alligators. He had to make it to shore without touching ground, or the alligators would eat him for dinner. All the while, Granny kept busy with her sewing, but Eldon still felt as if she was playing with him because she could sing, tell a story, and sew, all at the same time. Granny Thelma liked to watch Eldon play, but she did not like to see him jumping around on her furniture. So when he got a little too wild, she would say, "Eldon, you settle yourself down and come spend some time in Granny Thelma's wishing chair." It was a big old chair, particularly comfortable for upside-down sitting, and exactly the right size for Eldon to take a warm, curled-in-a-ball Sunday afternoon nap. Above the chair hung pictures of important people. Thelma said they were the people who helped her wake up each morning, and the people she said thank you to each night. While Eldon sat in the wishing chair, Granny Thelma usually told him a story about one of the people in the pictures. Sometimes she talked about a proud woman named Fannie Lou Hamer, who had her farm taken away just because she was African American and wanted to vote. Other times she told stories about Medgar Evers, a brave man who worked hard to make laws more fair to African Americans. Granny would cry a little when she told Eldon about how an angry white man killed Medgar just for standing up to say that all people should be treated equally. Eldon loved to listen to Granny's stories. He imagined that he was handsome and brave like Martin Luther King Jr. He would make great speeches and people would cheer. Or he pictured himself as a teacher like Septima Clark, helping other African Americans learn to read. And sometimes he tried to put words together like Langston Hughes. Perhaps someday he too could write poems, and his people would be proud of, and that everyone would love to read. All of Eldon's daydreams were wonderful, but there was something else he liked to do in the wishing chair too, and that was wish. He wished he were taller so his legs could reach the pedals on his brother's bike. He wished his dog Fella were really a lion, so he could ride him through his jungle. He wished he had enough money so that his mom did not have to work on Sundays. But when Eldon stood before the mark on the wall and saw he had not grown an inch, and Fella just lay down when Eldon tried to ride him, and his mom went to work as usual, Eldon doubted that the wishing chair had any power at all. So Eldon would ask his granny, "Why do you call this a wishing chair if it doesn't make wishes come true?" Granny would always answer, "You start wishing for the right things and they'll start coming true." Eldon didn't understand what that meant. All he knew was if it didn't make his wishes come true, then it wasn't a very good wishing chair. But he still made wishes anyway, just in case. As Eldon grew older, his games and wishes changed. Bicycle wishes turned into motorbike wishes. Jungle games gave way to dreams of flying to real jungles in faraway countries like Kenya and Ghana. But no matter what his age, Eldon never tired of one pastime, listening to Granny Thelma's stories. Eventually, Eldon was old enough to take care of himself on Sundays, but he always knew he could call on Granny Thelma if he had any trouble. On days when Eldon needed a little extra help with his schoolwork, he would stop by to see Granny. If he couldn't decide what to get his mom for her birthday, Thelma always had a great idea. Sometimes he stopped by just because he was lonesome. During one of these visits, Thelma shared some sad news with Eldon. She explained that she was growing tired of the long, cold Minnesota winters, and she missed Mississippi, the state where she had grown up. She was ready for warm southern breezes and cold lemonade and the sight of her sister Mattie's smiling face. Thelma had decided to move back home. Eldon helped her pack. Eldon wrapped dishes in paper and packed up teapots and old clocks. He carried out box after box marked kitchen, fragile, and sentimental. He loaded dressers and chairs and tables and lamps. He rolled up rugs and lingered over old photographs. Granny's little house was overflowing with wonderful memories. The old wardrobe, with its dark wood and dusty smell, had been the perfect hiding place. The well-worn cushions from Granny's green couch had been islands in his alligator-filled lake. And of course, the big old perfect for upside-down sitting wishing chair. Eldon sat down to take a rest. He touched the arms which had been rubbed bare of their flowers. He smiled as he remembered all those rainy afternoons filled with stories and wishes. Eldon was finally beginning to understand, after all these years, why Granny called it the wishing chair. It was not the chair that made wishes come true. It was the people he had learned about while sitting there. Because of all their work, it was possible for many of his wishes to come true. Some of the people Granny had told him about were not allowed to go to school, to vote, or even to learn to read. But Eldon could look forward to going to college and studying whatever he wanted to study and becoming whatever he wanted to become. When Granny came into the room, Eldon was sitting in the wishing chair, looking a little sad. She gave him a hug with her round, warm-as-a-quilt arms. Then she told him one last story. She said, "I knew a boy named Eldon who was proud and strong. As a child, he spent Sundays exploring a treacherous jungle and captaining a huge ship on a stormy sea. Eldon always managed to find a safe harbor. Not even a lake filled with alligators could keep Eldon down. As he grew older, Eldon didn't fight make-believe battles anymore. But sometimes he had to fight people who thought they could treat him unfairly because of the color of his skin. They didn't think he deserved the things he wished for. But Eldon worked very hard to make his wishes come true, because he knew that each step he took would make the path a little wider for his brothers and sisters who followed. Eldon, Thelma said, giving him a kiss, that old chair has spent enough time taking up space in my life, and I doubt that I can find room for it in the truck. I'm wondering if you would like to have it. Eldon nodded happily and thanked her for the special gift. It's hard to find the perfect for upside-down sitting, big purple-flowered, warm wintertime, story-listening wishing chair. The Wishing Chair, written and illustrated by Rick Dupré, published by Carole Books. Jumping the Broom by Courtni C. Wright, illustrated by Gershom Griffith, and published by Holiday Books. It is November. The leaves have turned red, yellow, and orange, and we have finished the harvesting. Life in the slave quarters has quieted down. The hardest work of picking, sorting, and baling the cotton is over for a while. We usually work from sunup to sundown every day except Sunday. On that day, we catch up on our personal chores or celebrate a wedding or birth. This Sunday, we will celebrate a wedding. Jumping the broom is not just a wedding. It's a special day in the slave quarters. It's a time when all of us get together as one big family. We laugh and sing a lot. We tell each other about things that happened since the last wedding, burial, or birth. We don't usually have much free time for fun with all the long hours and hard work. The last time we had a special celebration was during the spring, when Ben and Mary's baby was born. People around here have been talking about Tilly and Will's jumping the broom for weeks. We have picked the best crops from the small gardens in the slave quarters and have cooked them for the big meal after the wedding. Everything is being kept fresh in the creek out back. We made money from selling garden produce to the other plantations, to buy 2 chickens and a small pig from Master to go with the rabbits, squirrels, and venison we hunted ourselves. We'll cook the meat on spits turned by the youngest children. The last one to turn the spit gets the first crunchy slice of venison. I can almost smell the food cooking. It makes my mouth water just thinking about tomorrow. I'm too old for turning the spit. That's not work for an 8-year-old girl. For the last month, I've been sitting and working on a quilt with the women. Mama said it was time I learned to sew. After the women finished toiling in the field or in Master's cookhouse, and I finished cleaning in the big house and tending to Master's 2 children, we washed off the field dirt and grime and ate a quick meal of greens and yams. Then we met in one cabin or another, wherever there was a warm fire burning and a place to sit, and we sewed. Mistress gave us a few of her discarded dresses for Tilly's quilt. Some of them had barely been worn. It's hard to cut up a good dress for quilt pieces when our own dresses are so patched and threadbare. When one of the women likes a dress that we are planning to use for a quilt, we happily give it to her and cut up another one instead. We tried to pick dress cloth with flowers and bright colors. I wanted Tilly to have the best quilt ever made, so I picked out material with good texture too. The different textures made the quilt feel good. When we used wool fabric, the quilt piece was rough. When we used cotton, the piece was smooth. Since it will soon be winter and cold in Tilly's new cabin, I tried to use many pieces from an old navy blue wool dress given to us by Mistress. Tilly will need a very warm quilt when the wind begins to whistle through the cracks in the cabin walls. Tilly said that she wanted a star quilt with 8 points on each star. She helped us select the pieces of cloth. Since blue is her favorite color, there are 3 shades of blue in every star. There are also many reds, yellows, and greens. We made each star by stitching together 72 small diamond pieces. Next, we connected the stars to white pieces to form large squares. Then we sewed all the squares together to make the top of the quilt. We used a plain sheet of cloth for the bottom and stitched it to the top on 3 sides. Tilly stuffed a thin layer of cotton inside the pocket for warmth and stitched up the last side. With tiny stitches, we sewed through the 3 layers to keep the cotton in place. We also made pillows, sheets, and a sleeping pallet with new clean straw for Tilly's new home. We couldn't use feathers since Master and his family used them for their bedding. Tilly's pallet smells really sweet, even if it's only stuffed with straw. Sometimes as we sewed, we sang songs about freedom. You should hear the voices of the women rise to heaven as they sing or hum songs like Go Down Moses and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. One of the older women, named Hattie, had to stop sewing to wipe the tears from her eyes. The voices were so beautiful. While the women sewed, some of the men with carpentry skills made things for the cabin. They made baskets for holding crops from the slave quarters gardens. Later, the baskets will hold the new babies. The men also made wooden cooking spoons, tables, and 3-legged stools. Many times in the last few weeks, I have gone to bed tired, but as content as one of the barn cats sleeping in the sun. We have worked late into the night. This is such a joyful time in the quarters. I don't mind being tired. After all, we don't have a wedding every day. Bright and early in the morning, the rooster crows, waking me from a sound sleep. I open my eyes and remember that this is my sister's wedding day. After dressing quickly, I sit on a stool and watch Tilly get ready. Mama has sewn a pretty blue cotton dress with puffed sleeves for her. Mama is the best seamstress on the plantation and makes many of the gowns for Mistress. Her stitches are so tiny that you can hardly even see them. Mama says if I keep working at my sewing, someday my stitches will look just like hers. When the time comes, I can teach my daughter how to make the same tiny stitches, and then she can teach her daughter. I can hardly keep from bursting as I join the other slaves in the yard. We are waiting for Tilly in the clearing in front of the quarters. What a beautiful fall day. The birds are singing and the sun is shining brightly. The air is crisp and filled with the smells of food cooking. Mama has placed wild flowers in the 2 big plaits that circle Tilly's head. She looks like an African princess wearing a crown. With Mama on her left and Papa on her right and a big smile on her face, Tilly walks into the center of the clearing, where her future husband, Will, waits nervously. He chews on his bottom lip and shifts his hobnail shoes in the dust. As soon as he sees Tilly, Will breaks into a big grin and reaches out his hand to take hers. The eldest and most respected slave says a few words of counsel to them. There is no minister in the quarters. Finally, it's time for Tilly and Will to jump over a broom lying on the ground. Mama says that the broom is for sweeping away their past lives as they begin a new life together. Grandma Sadie says it sweeps away evil spirits, too. Everyone cheers, laughs, and sings except my brothers, who giggle into their hands. Mama and Papa give them a look that stops the giggles right away. The little children scamper from one person to the next. They have stood quietly by their mamas for the broom jumping and can't keep still any longer. As soon as we finish hugging and kissing Tilly and Will, we sit down to enjoy the meal. The roasted chickens, pig, squirrels, venison, and rabbits are done to a turn, and the juices from a chicken leg run down my chin as I hungrily bite into it. I look at my brother Peter, and I see butter from the yams and biscuits glistening on his chin, too. We point at each other and laugh, but we don't stop eating. The food tastes too good to stop for anything. Tilly and Will sit a little apart from the rest of us on stools in a place of honor just for them. She barely touches her food and occasionally gives him a special smile. His big, strong hand carefully closes over hers. They look so happy. Soon it's time for us children to entertain the older folks and the bride and groom. My brothers and I dance and sing along with the younger children. Matthew, the plantation musician, plays the fiddle. He's the best fiddler in the area. Master hires him out for the white folks' parties and weddings at other plantations. One of the older men pulls out his Jew's harp and plays along with the fiddle. Everyone claps wildly as my brother Joseph does a split in the dusty center of the circle. Checking his pants to be sure they didn't rip, he quickly stands up and takes a bow with one hand in front of him and the other behind his back. He looks very grown up and kind of funny at the same time. In the afternoon sun, the men and boys pitch horseshoes. The girls play with corn-husk dolls, and the young children chase each other in a game of tag. Young mothers with new babies sit in a circle and talk about their children. Older women sit outside the circle and knit. Sometimes they offer words of advice on child rearing. As the sun begins to set and the evening breezes begin to blow, we gather on the grass and talk. The young children, tired now, rest against their mamas. Someone begins to sing a song we all know. We all join in quietly. One of the elders leads us in the Lord's Prayer. The day has gone by too quickly. Twilight comes and it is over. The first stars of the night twinkle in the sky. Work starts at dawn tomorrow morning. Slowly each cook fire is extinguished and every pot is washed. The last sleepy child is tucked in, and everyone says good night and goes to bed. I lie on my pallet with my crazy quilt pulled up under my chin and look through a crack in the shutters at a little winking star. I feel lonely knowing that Tilly will never sleep next to me again. We have shared a pallet since I was born. At the same time, I'm glad because this was a special day for her and for Will and for all of us. I can hardly wait until the next jumping the broom. Jumping the Broom by Courtni C. Wright, illustrated by Gershom Griffith, and published by Holiday Books. Our next story is A Tall Tale, John Henry by Julius Lester, with pictures by Jerry Pinkney, published by Scholastic Books. You have probably never heard of John Henry, or maybe you heard about him but don't know the ins and outs of his comings and goings. Well, that's why I'm going to tell you about him. When John Henry was born, birds came from everywhere to see him. The bears and panthers and moose and deer and rabbits and squirrels and even a unicorn came out of the woods to see him. And instead of the sun tending to his business and going to bed, it was peeping out from behind the moon's skirts, trying to get a glimpse of the new baby. Before long, the mama and papa come out on the porch to show off their brand new baby. The birds oohed and the animals awed at how handsome the baby was. Somewhere in the middle of one of the oohs, or maybe it was on the backside of one of the ahs, that baby jumped out of his mama's arms and started growing. He grew and he grew and he grew. He grew until his head and shoulders busted through the roof, which was over the porch. John Henry thought that was the funniest thing in the world. He laughed so loud the sun got scared. It scurried from behind the moon's skirts and went to bed, which is where it should have been all the while. The next morning, John Henry was up at sunrise. The sun wasn't. He was tired and had decided to sleep in. John Henry wasn't going to have none of that. He hollered up into the sky, "Get up from there! I got things to do and I need light to do 'em by." The sun yawned, washed its face, flossed and brushed its teeth, and hurried up over the horizon. That day, John Henry helped his papa rebuild the porch he had busted through, adding a wing onto the house with an indoor swimming pool and one of them jacuzzis. After lunch, he chopped down an acre of trees and split them into fireplace logs, and still had time for a nap before supper. The next day, John Henry went to town. He met up with the meanest man in the state, ferret-faced Freddy, sitting on his big white horse. You know what he was doing? He was thinking of mean things to do. Ferret-faced Freddy was so mean he cried if he had a nice thought. John Henry said, "Freddy, I'll make you a bet. Let's have a race. You on your horse, me on my legs. If you and your horse win, you can work me as hard as you want for a whole year. If I win, you have to be nice for a year." Ferret-faced Freddy laughed an evil laugh. "It's a deal, John Henry." His voice sounded like bat wings on tombstones. The next morning, folks lined up all along the way the race would go. John Henry was ready. Ferret-faced Freddy and his horse were ready. Bang! The race was on. My great-granddaddy's brother's cousin's sister-in-law's uncle's aunt was there that morning. She said everybody saw Ferret-faced Freddy ride by on his big white horse, and they were sure enough moving. Didn't nobody see John Henry? That's because he was so fast, the wind was out of breath trying to keep up with him. When Ferret-faced Freddy crossed the finish line, John Henry was already on the other side, sitting in a rocking chair and drinking a soda mom. After that, Ferret-faced Freddy was so nice, everybody called him Frederick the Friendly. John Henry decided it was time for him to go on down the big road. He went home and told his mama and daddy goodbye. His daddy said, "You got to have something to make your way in the world with, son. These belong to your granddaddy." And he gave him two 20-pound sledgehammers with 4-foot handles made of whalebone. A day or so later, John Henry saw a crew building a road. At least that's what they were doing until they came on a boulder right smack dab where the road was supposed to go. This was no ordinary boulder. It was as hard as anger and so big around it took half a week for a tall man to walk from one side to the other. John Henry offered to lend them a hand. "That's all right. We'll put some dynamite to it." John Henry smiled to himself. "Whatever you say." The road crew planted dynamite all around the rock and set it off. Kerboom, blamity, blamity, boom, boom, bang, bang, boom. That dynamite made so much racket, the Almighty looked over the parapets of heaven and hollered, "It's getting too noisy down there." The dynamite kicked up so much dirt and dust it got dark. The moon thought night had caught her napping, and she hurried out so fast she almost bumped into the sun, who was still climbing the steep hill toward noontime. When all the commotion from the dynamite was over, the road crew was amazed. The boulder was still there. In fact, the dynamite hadn't knocked even a chip off it. The crew didn't know what to do. Then they heard a rumbling noise. They looked around. It was John Henry laughing. He said, "If you gentlemen would give me a little room, I got some work to do." "Don't see how you can do what dynamite couldn't," said the boss of the crew. John Henry chuckled. "Just watch me." He swung one of his hammers around and round his head. It made such a wind that leaves blew off the trees and birds fell out of the sky. Ring, the hammer hit the boulder. The boulder shivered like you do on a cold winter morning when it looks like the school bus is never going to come. Ring! The boulder shivered like the morning when freedom came to the slaves. John Henry picked up his other hammer. He swung one hammer in a circle over his head. As soon as it hit the rock, ring, the hammer in his left hand started to make a circle, and ring. Soon the ring of one hammer followed the ring of the other one so closely it sounded like they were falling at the same time. Ring, 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 ring. Chips and dust were flying from the boulder so fast that John Henry vanished from sight. But you could still hear his hammers ring, ring. The air seemed to be dancing to the rhythm of his hammers. The boss of the road crew looked up. His mouth dropped open. He pointed into the sky. There in the air above the boulder was a rainbow. John Henry was swinging the hammers so fast he was making a rainbow around his shoulders. It was shining and shimmering in the dust and grit like hope that never dies. John Henry started singing. "I got a rainbow, ring, ring, tied around my shoulder, ring, ring. It ain't gon' rain, no, it ain't gon' rain, ring, ring." John Henry sang and he hammered and the air danced and the rainbow shimmered and the earth shook and rolled from the blows of the hammer. Finally, it was quiet. Slowly the dust cleared. Folks could not believe their eyes. The boulder was gone. In its place was the prettiest and straightest road they had ever seen. Not only had John Henry pulverized the boulder into pebbles, he had finished building the road. In the distance where the new road connected to the main one, the road crew saw John Henry waving goodbye, a hammer on each shoulder, the rainbow draped around him like love. John Henry went on his way. He had heard that any man good with a hammer could find work building the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad through West Virginia. That was where he had been going when he stopped to build the road. The next day, John Henry arrived at the railroad. However, work had stopped. The railroad tracks had to go through a mountain, and such a mountain. Next to it, even John Henry felt small. But a worker told John Henry about a new machine they were going to use to tunnel through the mountain. It was called a steam drill. It can hammer faster and harder than 10 men, and it never has to stop and rest. The next day the boss arrived with the steam drill. John Henry said to him, "Let's have a contest. Your steam drill against me and my hammers." The man laughed. "I've heard you're the best there ever was, John Henry, but even you can't out-hammer a machine." "Let's find out," John Henry answered. Boss shrugged. "Don't make me no never mind. You start on the other side of the mountain. I'll start the steam drill over here. Whoever gets to the middle first is the winner." The next morning all was still. The birds weren't singing and the roosters weren't crowing. When the son didn't hear the rooster, he wondered if something was wrong. So he rose a couple of minutes early to see. What he saw was a mountain as big as hurt feelings. On one side was a big machine hooked up to hoses. It was belching smoke and steam. As the machine attacked the mountain, rocks and dirt and underbrush flew into the air. On the other side was John Henry. Next to the mountain, he didn't look much bigger than a wish that wasn't going to come true. He had a 20-pound hammer in each hand and muscles hard as wisdom in each arm. As he swung them through the air, they shone like silver, and when the hammers hit the rock, they rang like gold. Before long, tongues of fire leaped out with each blow. On the other side, the boss of the steam drill felt the mountain shudder. He got scared and hollered, "I believe this mountain is caving in." From the darkness inside the mountain came a deep voice. "It's just my hammers sucking wind, just my hammers sucking wind." There wasn't enough room inside the tunnel for the rainbow, so it wrapped itself around the mountain on the side where John Henry was. All through the night, John Henry and the steam drill went at it. In the light from the tongues of fire shooting out of the tunnel from John Henry's hammer blows, folks could see the rainbow wrapped around the mountain like a shawl. The sun came up extra early the next morning to see who was winning. Just as it did, John Henry broke through and met the steam drill. The boss of the steam drill was flabbergasted. John Henry had come 1.25 miles. The steam drill had only come 1/4. Folks were cheering and yelling, "John Henry, John Henry." John Henry walked out of the tunnel into the sunlight, raised his arms over his head, a hammer in each hand. The rainbow slid off the mountain and around his shoulders. With a smile, John Henry's eyes closed, and slowly he fell to the ground. John Henry was dead. He had hammered so hard and so fast and so long that his big heart had burst. Everybody was silent for a minute. Then came the sound of soft crying. Some said it came from the moon. Another one said she saw the sun shed a tear. Then something strange happened. Afterwards, folks swore the rainbow whispered it. I don't know. But whether it was a whisper or a thought, everyone had the same knowing at the same moment. Dying ain't important. Everybody does that. What matters is how well you do your living. First, one person started clapping, then another, and another. Soon everybody was clapping. The next morning, the sun got everybody up early to say goodbye to John Henry. They put him on a flatbed railroad car, and the train made its way slowly out of the mountains. All along the way, folks lined both sides of the track, and they were cheering and shouting through their tears, "John Henry, John Henry." John Henry's body was taken to Washington, D.C. Some say he was buried on the White House lawn, late one night while the president and the Mrs. President was asleep. I don't know about none of that. What I do know is this. If you walk by the White House late at night, stand real still and listen real closely, folks say you just might hear a deep voice singing, "I got a rainbow, ring, ring, tied round my shoulder, ring, ring. It ain't gonna rain, no it ain't gonna rain, ring, ring." John Henry by Julius Lester, pictures by Jerry Pinkney, and published by Scholastic Books. Follow the Drinking Gourd, story and pictures by Jeanette Winter, published by Random House. Long ago, before the Civil War, there was an old sailor named Pegleg Joe who did what he could to help free the slaves. Joe had a plan. He'd use hammer and nail and saw and work for the master, the man who owned slaves on the cotton plantation. Joe had a plan. At night, when work was done, he'd teach the slaves a song that secretly told the way to freedom. "Just follow the drinking gourd," it said. When the song was learned and sung all day, Pegleg Joe would slip away to work for another master and teach the song again. One day, a slave called Molly saw her man James sold to another master. James would be taken away, their family torn apart. Just one more night together. A quail called in the trees that night. Molly and James remembered Joe's song. They sang it low. When the sun comes back and the first quail calls, follow the drinking gourd, for the old man is awaiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. They looked to the sky and saw the stars. Taking their little son Isaiah, old Hattie, and her grandson George, Molly and James set out for freedom that very night, following the stars of the drinking gourd. They ran all night through the fields till they crossed the stream to the woods. When daylight came, they hid in the trees, watching, listening for the master's hounds set loose to find them. But the dogs lost the runaways' scent at the stream, and Molly and James and Isaiah, old Hattie and young George were not found. They hid all day in the woods. At night they walked again, singing Joe's song and looking for the signs that marked the trail. The river bank makes a very good road. The dead trees will show you the way. Left foot, peg foot, traveling on, follow the drinking gourd. Walking by night, sleeping by day, for weeks they traveled on, sometimes berries to pick and corn to snatch, sometimes fish to catch, sometimes empty bellies to sleep on, sometimes no stars to guide the way. They never knew what lay ahead. There was danger from men who would send them back, and danger from hungry beasts, but sometimes a kind deed was done. One day, as they hid in a thicket, a boy from a farm found them. In a bag of feed for the hogs in the wood, he brought bacon and cornbread to share. Singing low, they traveled on. The river ends between two hills. Follow the drinking gourd. There's another river on the other side. Follow the drinking gourd. On and on they followed the trail to the river's end. From the top of the hill they saw the new path, another river beneath the stars to lead them to Freedom Land. The drinking gourd led them on. The song was almost done. When the great big river meets the little river, follow the drinking gourd. For the old man is awaiting for to carry you to freedom if you follow the drinking gourd. Then they climbed the last hill. Down below was Peg-Leg Joe, waiting at the wide Ohio River to carry them across. Their spirits rose when they saw the old man. Molly and James and Isaiah, old Hattie and George ran to the shore. Under a starry sky, Joe rowed them across the wide Ohio River. He told them of hiding places where they would be safe. A path of houses stretched like a train on a secret track leading north to Canada. He called it the Underground Railroad. It carried riders to freedom. The first safe house stood on the hill. The lamp was lit, which meant it was safe to come. Ragged and weary they waited, while Joe signaled low, with a hoot like an owl. Then the door opened wide to welcome the freedom travelers. They were rushed through the house to the barn, for the farmers knew there were slave catchers near. A trap door in the floor took them under the barn to hide till it was safe to move on. Then Peg-Leg Joe went back to the river to meet others who followed the drinking gourd. With danger still near, too close for ease, the farmer sent the 5 travelers on. He drew a map that showed the way north on the midnight road to the next safe house just over 2 hills. This time, James called the signal, a hoot like an owl, that opened the door to a Quaker farm. The travelers were led to a secret room hidden behind shelves. There they rested for many days and healed their wounds. Soft beds, full meals, new clothes, hot baths washed away some fear and pain. Isaiah smiled. When they were strong, they traveled again, from house to house on the underground trail, still following the drinking gourd north. Sometimes they traveled on foot, sometimes by cart. The wagon they rode near their journey's end carried fruit to market and the runaways to freedom. At last they came to the shores of Lake Erie. Molly and James and Isaiah, old Hattie and young George, climbed aboard the steamship that would carry them across to Canada, to freedom. 5 more souls are safe, old Hattie cried. The sun shone bright when they stepped on the land. Follow the drinking gourd. Story and pictures by Jeanette Winter, published by Random House. Our People by Angela Shelf Medearis, illustrated by Michael Bryant and published by Athenaeum Books. Daddy says our people built the pyramids. I wish I could have been there. I would have helped them with the plans. Daddy says our people were kings and queens in Africa. He says some of our people were poets and mathematicians and some were artists who carved beautiful statues. I wish I could have been there. I would have been sitting on a throne, or maybe I would have been an artist. Daddy says our people traveled across the ocean with Christopher Columbus and explored America with Balboa, Ponce de Leon, and Lewis and Clark. I wish I could have explored new worlds with them. Daddy says our people suffered under slavery, but men and women like Frederick Douglass, William Still, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth led our people to freedom. I wish I could have been there. I would have led my people to freedom too. Daddy says our people came out of slavery with nothing but hope, but that our people became anything they wanted to be. Some were politicians, some started businesses, and some became teachers and doctors. Our people farmed the land, and some went out to the wild, wild west. I wish I could have been there. I would have gone out west too. Daddy says that our people created inventions that are still used today. He says that every time we stop at a stoplight or change a light bulb, we're using something our people have invented. He says that Garrett A. Morgan, Louis Latimer, Dr. George Washington Carver, and Dr. Charles Drew discovered some amazing scientific things to help all of humankind. I wish I could have been there. I would have created some amazing things too. Daddy says our people have had a glorious past, but that I have a glorious future. He says I can still build things and make beautiful things, explore new worlds, and help people who are suffering. Daddy says there are still plenty of things that need to be invented. He says I can even be a cowgirl if I want to. I can hardly wait. I want to do something great, just like the rest of our people. Our People by Angela Shelf Medearis, illustrated by Michael Bryant, published by Atheneum. I hope you enjoyed all those stories about African Americans and African American customs. I hope from them you learned something about some famous people, some not so famous. John Henry, for instance, was one of my favorite stories. That's a tall tale, story about someone who seems just larger than life. All of these stories can be obtained at your public library or at your school library. I hope you will take the opportunity to visit the library and read a book about an African American. There's so many neat things that you can learn by visiting the library and borrowing a book. And I hope you enjoyed all the books we shared today on Story Hour. See you next time.